U.S. law says that anywhere in the United States that you do experiments, you have to first do them in the lab, then on the laboratory animals, and then if you do them on humans, you must have informed consent and the permission of an institutional review board or a human subjects committee. Now, originally, human subjects committees were for clinics and hospitals, and institutional review boards were for college and universities. But now they're kind of interchangeable. But there are some standard rules. One, they have to have an odd number of people. Not odd people, odd number. Like 9 or 5 or 11. Number 2, they must vote unanimously. One person can block the experiment. Number 3, it cannot be more than half scientists. On the board. Number 4, there must be one religious representative. So if it's done on mostly Catholics, it has to be a priest. If it's done on like Tay-Sachs, which is typically a Jewish disease, it must be a rabbi. Number 5, they have to have at least one non-professional. Someone that's a plumber, a typist, a secretary on the committee. Now, what do they decide? They only decide one thing. And that is, after hearing the whole experiment planned out before them and having all the paperwork, there cannot be a significant chance of significant harm to the people after the experiment is over. In other words, when they finish with the experiment, there can be no chance, no significant chance, sorry, of significant harm. If there is a significant chance, a likelihood of significant harm, the experiment cannot be done in the United States and one person can block it. Now, they have an exception. What if there's a significant chance of minor harm? Significant chance of minor harm. Then, it can be done, but only with informed consent. Remember, there are experiments done on you that has no chance of any harm, and they don't have to tell you. But, I'll be right with you. A lot of people ask me at this point, what is a significant chance of minor harm? And the answer is, pick up any over-the-counter drug and read the back of the label. Can cause dry mouth, dizziness, occasional constipation, recurrent diarrhea, nausea, and gas. You know, those are minor harms. And you accept them when you buy over-the-counter drugs. Now, this informed consent must be in English. It cannot be in legalese. You know, that thing wherever Microsoft says we're going to update your program and they say you must click accept and you read it and you don't understand a word it says. It cannot be like that. It has to be in plain language that the people in the experiment will understand, and it has to include every possibility. Now, this has really, really helped stop all kinds of bad experimentation in the United States. However, there are ways to get around it. So one of them, questions I'll ask, is what are the ways that they use to get around it? Human Subjects Committee, Institutional Review Board. Number 1, stacking. Oh, you're in graduate school and you're doing a dissertation? I'll be your major professor and you won't have any problem getting your PhD if you'll be on my Human Subjects Committee. And by the way, vote the way I take it. It's called stacking the committee. is shopping. You shop it around. You take it to USC and they go, my God, you racist kid, get out of here. You take it to Western and they say, how many million did you say you would take for that? If we just worded it a little bit differently, we could probably get it right. They shop it around to hospitals and clinics and universities that are short of money and willing to do most anything and just do a little rewording. Another thing they do is they do it in the 3 countries that have no human subjects protection. And they are Italy, Mexico, and Israel. Remember, Israel and India do not recognize any patents in the world. You can go there and copy any drug you want without ever paying any fees or anything like that. Italy is where they did the human cloning experiments, where, you know, they fertilized 200 eggs, they found 3 they liked, they threw the rest of them in the garbage. So in these 3 countries, Mexico did the Laetrile, remember that? When there wasn't any treatments for cancers in the 60s, they said there was an extract of apricot pits that they named Laetrile that would cure cancer, and people went to Mexico and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars getting injections of nothing because it didn't do anything. Actually, it was kind of toxic. So they will take it to these 3 countries, which even though Italy is in the European Union and the European Union has human subjects laws, Italy doesn't. They're supposed to make their laws agree, but they haven't. So that's why they did the human cloning experiments there. Then they take it to 3rd world countries that have human subjects committees, but their bureaucracy are so corrupt, anybody can be bought off. And so what happens, like when I did my dissertation, what I did it on was, it was very strange. Oh, by the way, you cannot pay somebody for being in an experiment. Now, you can say, well, would you be in my experiment? And she said, sure, I'll be in your experiment, but I get $60 an hour, and I have to take off 3 days of work. They can pay you for that. They can pay you for the taxi or the bus, or they can pay you your lunch. But they cannot pay you a fee for the experiment, nor can they waive your, like in Florida, they used to do experiments and say, oh, you killed 26 people and you're in life, you know, you're a lifer in the prison. Well, if you take this dangerous experiment with radiation, it'll probably kill you and turn you into a brown leaf. Will knock 15 years off your lifetime sentence, so you'll only have to serve 3 more. You can't do that anymore. All right, that's called coercion. But anyway, so I read this experiment done on prisoners in Florida. When I was trying to come up with an idea on my dissertation, and they had taken a spermicide called nonoxyl 9 that's been around since the 1920s as diaphragm jelly or spermicidal foam, and it kills sperm so that people don't get pregnant. It's in the Today sponge, which is another contraceptive that has it in it, and it's a detergent. And so what they did was they gave it to men in a sexual lubricant, and then they supplied them with prostitutes with gonorrhea, and they found that they had less gonorrhea if they used nonoxyl 9 than just a regular sexual lubricant. So when I read that, I thought to myself, I wonder, I was working in the AIDS lab, I wonder what that detergent, since it disrupts plasma membranes, and there's an envelope around HIV, I wonder if it affects HIV. So I went to the immunology departments of it and virology and AIDS at CDC, and I said, I want to do an experiment to see if nonoxyl 9, which is already on the market and already approved and been found to be effective against gonorrhea, if it kills HIV in the laboratory. And after 1.5 years of work, we were able to prove that it kills HIV and every other sexually transmitted disease except for chlamydia in 1/1000th of a second. And so I wrote a paper and I submitted it to my boss, because that's what you have to do in the government. You know, you get paid by how many papers you get published, and they have to approve them. And he sent it back and said it's bad English. In fact, he sent it back 32 times. Well, on the 30th time, I took it next door to Emory University Department of English chairman, and I had him rewrite it and write a certified letter saying that the English was just fine. And when I submitted it the 31st time, and he rejected it because it was bad English, I filed an appeal. And so he had a hearing in which all the heads of departments that participated, you know, when you do an experiment, it's not just you. All the other people that are participating, I had electron microscopy, I had immunology doing a capture assay to see if the virus was live or dead. We had all this. We had a man named Bruce Bowler that named AIDS from GRID that worked out here in California for the Mariposa Foundation. He supplied the non-oxyl 9, which at the time was being made by Johnson & Johnson. Which, by the way, Johnson & Johnson doesn't make it anymore because they're a family company, and they don't want to be seen as making a contraceptive. So anyway, all these people were on the paper, and all the people at CDC were in this meeting, and he came in with his entourage, because, you know, he was head of HIV/AIDS and sexually transmitted disease. And by the way, this is a picture of him at that time, right here, Jim Curran. And he walked in, he sat down, and he said, well, I want to thank you all for all your efforts on this paper. You've really outdone yourselves. You've really put a lot of work in it. I really appreciate it. And I'd just like to tell you that in my opinion, it's too early for such a paper. We don't have good enough techniques to measure killing of HIV, and that my inclination is to deny publication. He said, however, you're all experts in your field, and I'd like to hear your opinion, each one of you. And every one of the people at the table said, it's the best it can be done. Science is about truth. We need to get this out so other people can do further research on it. And at the end, after everybody spoke, he stood up and he said, well, I want to thank you for your valuable insight and contributions, and I have decided it will not be published. And he left, at which point I am 26 years old, and I am getting, you know, when you're 26 years old, you believe there is only two colors in the world, black and white, right and wrong. There is nothing in between. So I got more and more hysterical. Plus, remember, this is my dissertation. I wasn't going to get a PhD if this didn't get published. And so I got more and more angry, and the more angry I got, the more hysterical I got. And so finally I went running up to his office, 3,000 scientists there, 17 buildings. I went and kicked the door in, walked in, ran past the secretary, knocked his door into his private office, leaned over the table and said, you are crawling to the top of the public health service because you're a bigot over the dead bodies of hundreds of thousands of people. At which point he picked up the phone and called security and had me escorted out of his office. Well, I called my cooperator, Bruce Bowler, here in California, president of the Mariposa Foundation, said, Bruce, he's not going to publish it. And he said, what? I said, no, he's not going to publish it. He said, but why? It's just in the laboratory. It just says, in the laboratory, this substance kills it. It doesn't say anything else. I said, yeah, I know, but he said that if we publish that, it will encourage people to have sex. He said, what? He said, yeah. He said that someone will read this, and since it's on the market right now, some prostitute will go out there and shove 3 gallons up their vagina and have sex without a condom with 42 people and get AIDS. And so he said, I don't get that. I said, I don't get it either, because the Bayer aspirin bottle says take 2. If you take 20 and you die, whose fault is it?
Yours.
And Bruce said, well, this is really a tragedy. And I said, yeah, it's a tragedy. I'm not going to get my PhD. And he said, well, that's sad. And I said, yeah. And he hung up. And about 2 hours later, as I'm sobbing, he called back and he said, congratulations, And I said, what? He says, it's going to be published. I said, no, it's not. He said, oh, yes, it is. You see, you send your cooperators the latest edition of every paper for them to sign off on. He says, I got the latest paper. So I called a news conference for CBS, NBC, Time Magazine, and the LA Times for 3 o'clock tomorrow here in Topanga Canyon, where the Mariposa Canyon. And I said, you can't do that, Bruce. It's not approved. I'll get fired. He said, we have to make sacrifices for the better good. I said, hold it. You're making the sacrifice for me. No, thank you. And he said, sorry. News conference is scheduled. Now you better get busy. So I told Jim Curran, and Jim Curran says, well, tell him to call me, because he's a big deal. And we will negotiate a press release together. So Bruce called him, and they spent 3 hours on the phone, and the next day when they announced it, the press immediately called the CDC, and Jim Curran said, what paper? Huh? I have no independent recollection of any paper about non-oxyl 9. He flat out lied, because he didn't sign anything. So, Bruce Fuller called Henry Waxman. Anybody know him? He's been a representative to the House of Representatives for 30 years from western Los Angeles. And he called his buddy, Senator Lowell Weicker, who was Senator of Connecticut, former governor of Connecticut. Any member of Congress can stand up on the floor of Congress and call for a congressional investigation. And so they did. And 2 years they investigated my paper. And not once in 2 years did anyone interview me. So they came back to Congress and they reported back that the paper had not been withheld because it had been published. How do you like that logic? Because they had illegally published it, it had not been withheld. How do you like that reasoning? And then they said two things. They said they rebuked Dr. Curran for poor control of the personnel in his laboratory, meaning me, and they rebuked him because there was no substantial difference between the third draft and the 32nd draft. And there was no real reason for delaying publication of the paper. Now, in the U.S. government, if you're in the military or anything else, and you're a captain, and you get a reprimand, you don't get any higher. No matter how well you do your job after that, that's it. That's the level you retire at. So he retired and went on to do other things. And to this day, if I go to the International Conference on AIDS, or I submit a publication, if I walk up on him, he turns green and purple and looks like he's going to projectile vomit. And he flips around and walks the other way, and so do I. And when I came to California to work for Salk, after that I went to Martin Luther King Charles Drew Medical Center, and my job was writing grants for experiments and ways to reduce the spread of HIV in minority communities. And every grant I wrote was rejected. So they just wanted to see, because Jim Curran is the world expert and on every committee, they just wanted to see if it was me. So they took one that was rejected and whited my name out, submitted the exact same grant, and it was approved.
Whoa. Don't
piss off the people in power on your way up, because they'll wave at you on the way back down. I couldn't get published in the Upper Saskatchewan Journal of Microbiology if it was on AIDS, because that guy is on almost every committee. So remember, with moral and responsible, guess what he did? 2 years later, he published a paper on prostitutes in Kinshasa, Zaire, using non-oxyl 9. And listen to what he did. He took illiterate prostitutes, tested them once for HIV, divided them into 2 groups, gave them safer sex counseling and 50 condoms and a notebook to record their sexual activities. One group, he gave the Today sponge with non-oxyl 9. The other one, he gave a mineral oil suppository. 2 years later, the study ended, and they found that 27% of the group got non-oxalate 9 became HIV positive. And 24% of the group that got the mineral oil lubricant became positive. There is no difference between those numbers. If you do a statistical analysis, they're the same number. So he found nothing. But he said because this one was a higher number, non-oxalate 9 must not only not help, but it might increase the likelihood of getting HIV. Now the problem is, one, you can't do one test on somebody and say they're negative. Because any blood test is only as good as what you did 90 days ago. What did you do last week? They're prostitutes. Two, how long does 50 prostitutes last a good girl who does good work? They only gave them 50. They had to take 3 buses across a city of 3 million to pick up more. Another error in the experiment is, how do illiterate women keep notebooks? Next, mineral oil dissolves latex condoms. Another error in the experiment. So this experiment was crap from start to finish, and the biggest one is getting HIV a bad thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So why did they do it in Zaire? Do we have prostitutes here? Because if you don't know, I can take you up to Sunset if you want girls and trannies, and if you want boys, you can go to Santa Monica Boulevard at Fairfax. You can ask Hugh Grant. He was at Fairfax and Sunset at the 7-Eleven when he picked up his prostitute. So, when you see a paper done in a third world country, ask yourself, why didn't they do that in the United States if it's so safe? And then, if you call the CDC and ask them, should you use non-oxalate 9? They said, oh, there was a study done in prostitutes. The study was crap. But because he did it, it got published. So remember, you can get around this if you're a big enough deal. All right? Anyway, they finally did do the experiment among prostitutes in Seattle. And they did find that it does, because how many of you have sex 7, 10 times a day? Only me? If you're using a detergent 7 times a day, do your hands dry out and get cracked?
Yes.
Of course. So they did find that it does. It is not what I thought, which was, I thought it was a microbicide, that if the condom tears, spills, or something like that, it'll give you a backup. But it's not in prostitutes. But remember, I was married. And I know how many times people that are married have sex. It's not often. You gotta both be not tired, the kids gotta be asleep, you gotta be in the mood, you gotta have bought roses beforehand, and there is just so many things that have the moons that have to line up after that first 2 months. Now the first 2 months you'll do it on every surface in the house, but after that it's like, you know, you're lucky if it's once every 4 weeks. So I think in real person usage it might be useful, but they're right. Certainly in prostitutes, it's not a good idea. All right. So anyway, we're moving on.
Mr. Hicks?
Yeah.
When you were talking about, I know this is long past now. You were talking about the 3 parts of what the essay should include. The last part was the character or process.
We haven't gotten there yet. You have to wait till we get there. We'll talk about it. How do you move from a hypothesis or an idea to a scientific law, which is right where we're at. The word systematic means using the scientific method. Now, every one of us hates studying the scientific method. More than anything on earth, I hate teaching it. I've got to teach it one more time today. And then it'll be another 3 months, thank God. All right, and every time I hear the scientific method, I do exactly what you're going to do. I look like I'm interested. I look like I'm interested, but I'm at home making lists of things I should do tomorrow. Alright? I know. I hate the scientific method too. And here's another problem with it. It's not a list, but how do we teach it? Like a list. It's a way of thinking. It's an orderly way of thinking. It is not a list. It is an orderly way of thinking. And so, here we go on the scientific method. First of all, who was the first dude to come up with it? It was Aristotle. Aristotle said if you want to know if something influences something else, get two groups, apply what you think causes the change, and see if it does. He was the first scientist. Copernicus was the first one to use measurements and separate religion and science. All right, and remember, it is a comparative, objective, measurable, reliable, repeatable decision-making process. It's all of those things. And what is the number one thing that makes science different from anything else? If you do it the same way, you will get the same result every time. It's called a recipe. You read the microwave box, and if you do it the same way, you will get the same delicious microwave meal every time. And the same peanut butter cookies. All right, so how do we start science? Now, the first step in the scientific method is the one I hate the most. Observe the universe for something to study. We don't do that. Okay, we don't come and look in your armpit for something to study. You know, under her left earlobe. Here's what we do. Every third Saturday, Science magazine arrives at my house. Now, I am standing there at the mailbox, all excited. That is the best journal in the world today. Now, 5 years ago, it was JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association. Now it's Science. What do you think Science covers? Everything in science. So when I get that little journal, I open it up and look in the index. Now, particle physics is not my thing. So I look through the index, and I may see something on particle physics, or in chemistry, or, even, hip replacement. And I might read the introduction or the summary, but I don't understand squat about particle physics. 60% of the universe is dark energy, and 40% of that is Higgs boson God particles and all that crap. I don't get it. I don't know string theory. So I don't read that. So when I look through the index, first I look for something in biology. If there's something in biology, I'm amused. If it's in microbiology, I'm almost happy. If it's in virology, I'm becoming ecstatic. And if it's in retrovirology, RNA viruses, I'm beside myself, because that's my field. And so when I get that thing, and I take it upstairs, and I see there's an article in HIV. Holy crap. I'm just out of my mind excited. Now, I don't say, oh my gosh, look at this article. My goodness, Dr. Curran, that little old sly dog, he has done another incredible piece of work. I do not. I look at it and I say, that SOB has put out another piece of, I bet, just like that one in Kinshasa Prostitutes. And I get my red pen, and I mark everything I think could be an error or a mistake. This thing, every page needs a tourniquet. It's bleeding so bad. And I'm ecstatic, ripping it to shreds for up to 3 or 4 hours. And then I put my pen down because I know I'm hysterical. And I forget it for a day or two. And then I go back and look at my notes and see if there really is a serious problems with the experiment, or I was just being a bitch. That's what every scientist in the world does to every article in his study, his or her. And if we find errors, like I mentioned in that study on prostitutes, how do illiterate women keep notebooks? One blood test certainly won't say you're negative. Latex condoms are dissolved by mineral oil, and you can't, if there is no significant difference, you didn't discover anything, you can't say there's a hint. All those things, everybody else in the world that's in HIV research wrote a letter. They have to have an odd number of people. Not odd people, odd number. Like 9 or 5 or 11. Number 2, they must vote unanimously. One person can block the experiment. Number 3, it cannot be more than half scientists. On the board. Number 4, there must be one religious representative. So if it's done on mostly Catholics, it has to be a priest. If it's done on like Tay-Sachs, which is typically a Jewish disease, it must be a rabbi. Ask me at this point, what is a significant chance of minor harm? And the answer is, pick up any over-the-counter drug and read the back of the label. Can cause dry mouth, dizziness, occasional constipation, recurrent diarrhea, nausea, and gas. You know, those are minor harms. And you accept them when you buy over-the-counter drugs. Now, this informed consent must be in English. It cannot be in legalese. You know, that thing wherever Microsoft says we're going to update your program and they say you must click accept and you read it and you don't understand a word it says. It cannot be like that. It has to be in plain language that the people in the experience. Number 5, they have to have at least one non-professional. Someone that's a plumber, a typist, a secretary on the committee. Now, what do they decide? They only decide one thing. And that is, after hearing the whole experiment planned out before them and having all the paperwork, there cannot be a significant chance of significant harm to the people after the experiment is over. In other words, when they finish with the experiment, there can be no chance, no significant chance, sorry. The U.S. law says that anywhere in the United States that you do experiments, you have to first do them in the lab, then on the laboratory animals, and then if you do them on humans, you must have informed consent and the permission of an institutional review board or a human subjects committee. Now, originally, human subjects committees were for clinics and hospitals, and institutional review boards were for college and universities. But now they're kind of interchangeable. But there are some standard rules. One, of significant harm. If there is a significant chance, a likelihood of significant harm, the experiment cannot be done in the United States and one person can block it. Now, they have an exception. What if there's a significant chance of minor harm? Significant chance of minor harm. Then, it can be done, but only with informed consent. Remember, there are experiments done on you that has no chance of any harm, and they don't have to tell you. But, I'll be right with you. What a lot of people